It's been kind of a lifelong obsession, really. But I do have a formative memory. I know exactly when it started. At the end of the steps at my mom's house, there was a bookcase when I was growing up, and it was filled with my grandmother's VHS tapes. And on it was a copy of Lon Chaney's Phantom. It was the Eastman print, and the artwork on the cover, he was turning dramatically with his hand up in the air. It was based on a real photograph. And, that face gave me nightmares. It terrified me. And I've always been the sort of kid that if something scares me, I want to be an expert on it. I want to understand everything about it. So that's exactly what I did. After watching it, I fell in love with silent films, and Lon Chaney became my favorite actor of all time. He still is, to this day. I was about 5 years old, maybe 4, closer to 5, when that happened. And I devoted a good 10 years to trying to find every Phantom I could. Every time that one of the Phantom movies played on the TV, I would VHS record it. Really dating myself hard here, aren't I? Until I had a collection. The Disney Channel original movie, Phantom of the Megaplex, has probably never been watched by anybody as much as it was watched by me. I wore that thing out. And eventually, around 14 years old, when I was in high school, I finally went on to YouTube. YouTube was just kind of becoming a big thing among my friends at that point, and I discovered who would become my favorite YouTuber and remain my favorite YouTuber to this very day, Phantom Reviews, or the Phantom Reviewer. He was an adult with an expendable income who had the same obsession as me, tracking down every Phantom movie. And with the resources that he gave me through his videos, I was able to track down and find and watch most of the Phantom movies myself. It was kind of a dream come true. It was a great time to be alive. And my Phantom collection has grown exponentially since then. Now, I guess you're kind of wondering why I'm telling you this or why you should even care. Well, if you're a Phantom fan like me, and let's be honest, you probably are because you're watching the video, I decided I'm going to pay a little homage to the Phantom Reviewer. For the next several months, we're going to be checking out every Phantom of the Opera movie that I own, and some that I don't own, but they're on YouTube. And we're going to talk about why these movies are so cool and so important to me. And all the while, I'm going to be prepping because in 2025, later 2025, I will be finally releasing the culmination of all my years of obsession, my own adaptation of this book. So I'm telling you all of this because now you know I'm committed. I have to get it done because other people know about it. Along the way, I'll be talking a little bit about what inspired me about each version and what I'll be including in mine because of each version. But we have to start somewhere, so let's start at the very beginning. So what better movie to begin my series of Phantom Reviews than the very first one? The 1916 version. Gotcha. I know, the title says 25. Don't worry, we're going to get to it, but we can't really cover all the Phantom films in order if we don't talk about the 1916 version first. The problem is there's not a lot to talk about, not enough for a full video anyway. You see, the 1916 Phantom is a lost film. We don't even have any official imagery, still photography, anything from it. All we have is a couple of movie posters and some articles written about it by people who saw it, and these were contemporary articles, so we know there's not really any reason for them to lie about seeing these films. They weren't lost yet. So in this case, the 1916 Phantom was apparently a pretty well received and financially successful German film. You might be familiar with Nosferatu, and that the Germans were kind of famous for taking intellectual property that was not theirs and making movies out of it, which is why Nosferatu was made, but then F.W. Murnau was sued by the Bram Stoker estate because he ripped off Dracula, causing almost every copy to be destroyed. Luckily, a couple copies survived, and that's the only reason we have Nosferatu. It would and should, by all accounts, be a lost film. We just got very lucky, or very blessed, one of the two, to be able to have this film at all. The 1916 Phantom, we were not quite so lucky or not quite so blessed with. You see, this film, from what we know about it, because we do have a sort of a plot synopsis, is pretty accurate to the Leroux novel. In fact, we know that it includes at least a couple scenes which were not in the original 25 Phantom, and to the best of my knowledge, are not in any other movie adaptation of Phantom of the Opera. Now you might think, wow, so this was the ultimate adaptation of the book and we don't have it. Well, not quite, because much like the Chaney version, it changes the ending. This time, some sort of boiler overloads and Raoul gets away with Christine and his companion, who I assume is some equivalent to the Persian, if not the Persian himself. They escape, the boiler blows up, killing the Phantom and collapsing his lair on top of him. I'm sure it was very dramatic, and it seems like, at least in part, the collapsing lair seems to have been taken and used in the 1943 Claude Rains film. Whether by accident or actual emulation, I guess we'll never know. More likely it was a coincidence. However, it's just kind of a fun little coincidence that I wanted to include for the sake of the video. Again, I can't really give this a proper review because we just know nothing about it. We know who some of the actors were, but even then there's some debate about who played which character because it's kind of hard to be sure. Without any actual reels or stills from the film ever showing up, which becomes more unlikely with every passing year, it's just most likely that this film will remain lost forever. Unfortunately, because it is a golden piece of Phantom history that I guess we're just never going to have. That being said, the 1925 film is often called the first Phantom, and with good reason. It should rightly be called the first Phantom because it's the first Phantom we have. And the 1916 film, we actually thought might have been a myth for a long time until a certain couple things showed up to prove to us that, yes, it existed, it was real. But I still think that the title of First Phantom deservingly goes to the Chaney film, and it's the way I refer to it most of the time. This film was directed by Rupert Julian and stars Lon Chaney Sr. as the Phantom himself, Eric. The performances in this movie can be a little over the top, but you kind of expect that in 1920s. However, if you are really familiar with silent films, you would know that the performances in this film are over the top even by 1920s silent film standards. Where the film really shines is with the Eric character. Chaney's performance really does elevate what would have been much lesser material in less skilled hands. And I think his performance is primarily the reason the film is remembered. Which, in a way, although he's my favorite actor of all time, and I have said that in many videos, Chaney is my favorite actor of all time, it is kind of a shame that Mary Philbin doesn't get some credit, because she probably gives the second best performance in the film. And to my mind, she is among the pantheon of Christines, one of the best, one of the most definitive. Not the definitive one to me personally, because I've just seen so many, but I do rate her very highly. She's very aesthetically beautiful in the role, and she's also just really gives a very youthful, innocent sort of benevolence to Christine that without words you get across so quickly from, not really getting that much screen time with her. You really get across from Christine what an innocent, loving sort of character she is, and it gives us all the more reason to want her to survive to see the end of this. I call this film a classic, and it truly is. It was the first silent film that I ever saw, and so it will always hold a special place in my heart, and I think that it deserves to be called nothing less than classic. There is a problem with it, and if you know anything about its history, you already know what that problem is. We are not watching the great classic silent film Phantom of the Opera, we are watching the dregs, the remains of a great film. Allow me to explain. You see, this actually is not the 1925 Phantom of the Opera. Not by a long shot. What we are looking at right now is the 1929 talkie reissue. What am I talking about? It's quite simple. You see, in 29 and 30, when sound films were becoming a big thing, a lot of studios had the really kind of brilliant idea, hey, let's not go back and refilm our classic movies, let's just dub them. And as long as the words fit close enough, most people are just going to be impressed with the fact that it has sound at all.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Yes, of course.
It's been a pleasure.
Gentlemen, one more thing. You may hear of Ghost.
Spirits?
They say he resides in box 5.
Phantom was reissued, this time dubbed in with sound, with many of the actors returning. Chaney, however, did not, and so whenever the film has a scene with the Phantom, it just reverts back to being a silent movie again. Now, that might seem a little weird now, but in 1929, it was actually fairly common. In fact, The Jazz Singer is often called the first talkie. And yet what it actually is a silent movie with synchronized song and dance numbers. So in the case of Phantom, it's sort of half and half like that. There is some discrepancies and people disagree. Did Chaney have it in his contract that nobody could ever dub him? I've always been kind of doubtful of that. It seems rather a dubious claim because his contract would have been made long before talkies were a thing, and unless he renegotiated the contract to include that after sound, it just seems a little weird to me. I think it's more likely that in 29, the remake of The Unholy Three was coming out, in which they were advertising like crazy that Lon Chaney would speak for the first time on film. And I think they probably just did not want to get it confused if somebody else dubbed Chaney in The Phantom, that which one was actually his voice and which one was first. So I think that's more likely the reason, but I could be wrong. So why are we watching the 29 version rather than the 25 version? Well, here's another version. This one is actually much more accurate to the original way we would have seen it in 25. It has a lot of scenes that you won't see anywhere else. And by all accounts, it's just a darn good version of the film. It's actually the version I prefer when watching this movie, despite the fact that the 29 one is the one that got all of the fancy digital remaster and new score by Carl Davis, which is a great score. This version is just more like the book. It seems more whole. It feels more like a total sum movie. But this version is also not the 1925 film. See, here's what happened. In 1925, they released to test audiences an original version of The Phantom. This included a lot of Leroux goodness from the book, right? It had the Phantom playing for Christine in the graveyard on her father's violin. And most iconically, it had the original ending from the book where Christine kisses the Phantom and he dies of a broken heart. Beautiful, poetic way to end the story. Truly, I'm sure something that Leroux would have been proud to see portrayed on screen by the greatest actor of the time. American test audiences said, no, this villain has to pay for his crime. Screw redemption, we just pretend to be Christians on Sundays. I am a Christian myself, this stuff just really gets on my nerves. So they had to take the film away and film a brand new ending where a mob beats the Phantom to death and throws him in the river. It really that has gotten on my nerves since I found out about it, okay? It just gets under my skin and gnaws at me day and night that because of these people who thought we wanted some frontier justice at the end of this movie rather than a beautiful story of redemption, we lost the original ending. Remember, film at this time was seen more as an industry and a novelty. Very few people thought of film as an art form, so whenever a scene was deleted from a movie, they just snipped it off and threw it in the trash can. Now that I got that rant out of my system, there is another scene that was cut, and it probably is justifiable. It was that scene I mentioned in the graveyard. Now, I say it's justifiable because you would have seen the Phantom's face. which spoils the iconic unmasking that has become part of pop culture to the point that people who've never seen a silent movie know what this scene is. However, again, that wasn't the reason it was removed. It was removed because it offended religious audience members. I've never been able to find a source to say exactly what offended them. Was it because Protestants thought it seemed too Catholic that she was praying at a graveside? Was it because Catholics didn't like that this fight was happening on hallowed ground? Was everybody just already so offended by the ending that they just wrote it in just to have something else to complain about? I don't know. It's really hard to tell exactly what upset them. But for whatever reason, that scene was also cut. So the film was re-edited with a bunch of comedic scenes and the new ending where the Phantom's beaten to death, and wouldn't you know it, the test audience didn't like that version either. So all of the footage was put in the hands of one editor who was just told, make sense of this movie, give us something. And you know what? It was a good attempt, but we still end up with a film that is a real mishmash of all sorts of things. There's comedic scenes that completely fly in the face of the tone they're trying to set. There's suspense scenes that seem really cut short. There's a scene with a guy holding a lantern and nobody can figure out what version this originally came from or what he's even doing there, because it seems like he's talking, but maybe he's not. James Rolfe on the Cinemassacre channel did a whole video related to the topic of the Lantern Man, and I highly suggest you watch it. I don't have time to cover it all here because this video is already getting long, but it just kind of shows you how so much was going on and so much was being lost and thrown carelessly away that we ended up with film that we now think of as a classic, and truly it is. But it is a classic that in reality is a Frankensteinian creature of 3 different versions of this movie. And even that is not the version most people have seen. Most people have actually seen the 29 reissue because it had the best picture quality, and so it was the one that got the digital remaster. It was really hard to work with some of the nitric decomposed original, and so we have 2 prints floating around, and which one is the best really just comes down to your taste. So a lot of this, I know, has just been me talking about the history of the film and complaining a bit, but that's kind of the nature of this film. If you want to hear me just fanboy over it and talk about Mary Philbin and Chaney and how much I love the set design and the direction and how this was really the first true American horror film, then at the end, on the end screen, I will have the link to my full-length commentary, which goes for about 50 minutes. I've trimmed out some of the boring bits. But if you want to watch the full version, very soon I'll have that up on my Patreon, and you're welcome to watch that there. That's where I get much more into the things I really love about the film. But for now, I'm just kind of giving a quick overview of the film and what it culturally has meant and kind of how I view it, because all of that history does color the way I see this film. Classic, truly enjoyable, a lovely little piece of gothic cinema, but not as great as the test audiences should have allowed it to have been. And almost 100 years later, test audiences are still ruining movies for us. So, how much has changed and how little has changed, huh? Next time we'll be talking about the 3rd Phantom film, chronologically speaking. But if you're thinking of Claude Rains, think again.